Do you like inspirational short stories? I love them. My background is business, education, and psychotherapy, and I discovered some years ago just how powerful stories can be. Now, when I say to people that I'm passionate about stories, they usually say, What, do you mean children's stories? And yes, children's stories are extremely valuable. But who doesn't like a good story? Stories are for everyone. How many of you can remember a story that really had an impact on you? Perhaps a story that you might have heard in the pub, or a story that you read as a child, or a film that you saw, or a TV programme. How many people stand and tell people about a programme that they've watched because it had an impact on them? And so it is that stories are much more powerful than people realise. They kind of take them for granted and unconsciously soak them all up. But actually, we can consciously use them. So, who is this channel for? Well, I was hoping that I could share this channel with anybody who might be interested in using stories. So that could be teachers, educators, mentors, coaches, salespeople, business owners, or just people that like a story. And so if you're interested in having a look at some of the stories that I have to offer, and I'm going to be offering them for all age groups and to demonstrate all kinds of different stories, then please click subscribe. Now, it might be that you would be interested in taking the journey of learning how to consciously use stories. If so, I have a free tips for stories, 6 tips for stories that I'm offering you. So click below and I will send that to you. Meanwhile, here is a story. George was a keen gardener, and most days he could be seen in his front garden gardening. And in the corner of his garden was a huge tall tree. And often he could be seen looking at the tree as the branches and the leaves moved. And people said that he talked to the wind as it whispered through the trees. And George could often be seen with a smile on his face. In fact, he was a very smiley person. He was so smiley that it made people trust him. Now, he wasn't without his critics. There were some people for whom he was just a bit weird. And others, it has to be said, were a little bit afraid of him, and so they steered clear. But many people dropped by and had a chat with George when he was in his garden, which was most days. And people being people, they brought with them their problems and their issues. Now, you probably know that there are very few people who really truly listen to someone with 100% attention and make that person feel like they are the most important person at that moment. But George, he was one of them. He would stop his pruning, his digging, his hoeing, or whatever he was doing, and he would listen. And sometimes, yes, he would look up at the tree. as the branches waved. And sometimes he would perhaps make a suggestion or ask that one important question. And sometimes he would just listen. But every single one of those people that visited him left feeling lighter, feeling happier. Now it just so happened that there was a new young lady who moved into the area. And she'd heard stories about George in the pub, in the newsagents on the corner, and she was intrigued. Her name was Sophia, and she decided she would drop by and introduce herself to George. And so she did. They say you talk to the wind. Ah, yes, said George. What else do they say? They say that you're the person to come to if I have a problem. And do you? Asked George. No, not especially, said Sophia. I just wanted to ask you whether you thought that the wind had answers to some of our questions. Well now, said George, leaning on his shovel. No one's ever asked me that before. And he leaned over and he pulled towards him a beautiful light pink rose. And he smelt that rich rose smell. And he said to Sophia, do you believe that there is a life force running through everything like this rose? Oh yes, said Sophia. I suppose some would call it God. Indeed, said George. Some might call it source, life force, universal intelligence. And we are all connected to it. And you know, Sophia, there's nothing special about me. If you want to know something, just quieten the mind, go inside and ask. Ah, said Sophia. I'll do that, and I'll come back and tell you how I got on. And she left with a spring in her step. I hope you liked that story, and thank you so much for listening to this video. And if you liked it, please click like and maybe comment, and you can share. And don't forget, there's 6 tips to how you can use stories too by just clicking below. Thank you.